And we are back with another live stream. Daphne, today we're going to be talking about boundaries.
Yeah, and this was we didn't have any conversation around this. I didn't even check in with you to see, do you want to talk about boundaries?
I feel like you just don't care, and I should be. My boundaries have been crossed here. I'm totally cool.
And that's the best way to handle it.
I
I
feel
think
like such a victim. You do this to me all the time, and you wait until we get started, and it's like, no,
it's part of the appeal of the show.
Is that what it is?
I think so. That's what I'm going to convince you, and I'm going to rationalize not checking in with you. There's all types of things we're going to talk about with boundaries today, and in a very healthy way, and why they're important, what they are and what they aren't, and then how do we do it? How do we have these boundaries?
Welcome to Life, the ultimate choose-your-own adventure game with hosts Cliff Ravenscraft and Daphne Scott. Join this dynamic duo as they explore the profound concept of life as a thrilling adventure, blending ancient wisdom and modern psychology. Embrace the joy of living with presence, creativity, and playfulness. It's time to navigate the game of life together. Are you ready to play? Let the adventure begin.
So, Daphne, what stood out to me is the very opening line. And all I could think of as like a baby being birthed, coming into this world. Welcome to life. Ultimate choose your own adventure game.
Here you are. Enjoy.
Here are your hosts, Daphne and Cliff.
Could you imagine? That'd be way too much responsibility for me.
That's way too scary for me.
Here are your hosts. Not your parents or caregivers. Here are your hosts. That's a real reframe on the whole thing.
Yeah?
Yeah.
In what way?
Well, like instead of like, here are your parents, here are your caregivers,
Oh,
here,
yes.
these are just your hosts. These are the people.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Well, what stuck out to me today was and it just made me laugh too. I think we say the profound concept of life.
Yeah, it's just one of those concepts that we have.
One of the profound ones, one of the many. Well, speaking of profound concepts, we're going to talk about boundaries today. And
I love boundaries.
yeah, I do too. Say more. What do you love about boundaries?
I love boundaries because I've learned that it's okay to care for my own well-being without worrying about how other people perceive my desire for my own self-care.
I mean, Cliff, that is profound. Which I think boundaries is such a conversation. And when you talk about self-care, in my experience, boundaries are they are the foundation. I think a lot of times when we've heard about self-care, we think of, sleeping maybe, or getting a massage or going for walks, or, a lot of things, which I think are all part and parcel of self-care. Nevertheless, I do feel that boundaries, able to take a walk, boundaries are the foundation. So I love that you just got right at like self-care, and also just learning that it is okay for you to express, I'm willing, and we're going to define what we mean by boundaries here in a second, but be able to express like what your needs are, and to do that without the feeling of disappointing others, without the feeling, or maybe just maybe you have the feeling, but you don't get trapped in it so much that you don't have boundaries, right? What people think of you, wanting to be well liked, accepted, so on and so forth. So yeah, I mean, you got right at it. What you love about them. I too love them for the very same reason.
Absolutely. And I think you and I have some serious similar experiences growing up in childhood.
Yes.
And there was some needs for some boundaries that maybe didn't come natural, but later in life, it's like, maybe this isn't the way life ought to be.
Yeah.
And I know that was certain for me. I have been very open about the fact that I grew up with my biological dad, who was an alcoholic and a drug addict from the day that I was born until the day he died in May of 2015.
Yeah.
I absolutely love him. Looking back, I see amazing experiences that I have with him. and I wouldn't be who I am in many ways, obviously in one way, but physically, without him.
Yeah.
Yet at the same time, I will tell you that while he was alive until 2015, all the way up through then, I wasn't great at boundaries. I was very much aware of my need for boundaries. I had
Mhm.
even read the book by Henry Cloud and Dave and
Yeah.
Townsend and Cloud. I had read the book Boundaries, and I struggled with setting boundaries. It wasn't until after he passed that I went through a major growth spurt in my own emotional management and learning about taking care of myself and what it means to live a life according to the way you feel called to live it and what it really means to set down a boundary and to
Yeah.
protect those boundaries. But yeah, so I went most of my adult life, certainly my young adult life and my childhood with almost no boundaries.
Yeah, same. And I want to give a shout out to growing up in a home where there have been addiction issues, where there have been, I mean, this can run its course with anyone, okay? But I do think that and I'm saying this to the person listening to us, if you've had that experience, it does come with its own sort of set of family dynamics. As a matter of fact, one of the things we'll talk about today, I mean, I think where a lot of this comes from is all of it, codependency, family dynamics, looking at family systems theory, all these things. This idea of boundaries was born out of that. And what does that mean? Because there's often a lot of caretaking that happens when you're in a family of addiction. You're a child, you become the caretaker, you become the adult at a very young age, so on and so forth. So I say this more to, I think you and I have walked I think you nailed it, very similar paths. And I say this more to the person listening. If you've had that experience, hopefully today will be really helpful to just get some insight. And Henry Cloud is a person that I reference at the end of the show. Actually, there are many books on boundaries. His website includes all of them, I think. And there's a lot that you can do. And I don't know about you, Cliff, but it has been a lifelong journey for me.
Yes, it
Really.
has. Yeah, and I'm still learning them. In fact, just this week, I set some new boundaries for myself,
Oh, yes.
and it was such a gift to see how easy it was for me to overcome some of the resistance that I initially had. Can I share with you the story?
Please.
So I recently completely changed my routines.
Good.
And I am currently living a life right now for the last 3.5, 4 weeks. I wake up at 4 a.m. every morning and I'm at the gym by 5 a.m. And I have this early morning few hours to myself. And then I like to come home and I'd like to take a nap and then do my afternoon. Well, to do that, you and I were scheduled to record this podcast every Monday at 10 a.m.
That's
And
right.
then I would have other calls scheduled other days of the week at 10 a.m. And then I would have all these other things scheduled, a little bit later in the day. And I had so many different things going on. It's like, man, I really want to do this 4 a.m. routine,
Hmm.
but I've got so many things scheduled for the next 4.5 weeks that I should just live up to that. I should just let everything go. Yeah, and eventually I'll be able, but I'm gonna just burn the candle both ends of the stick. That was the thought. Then I'm
Yeah.
like,
Isn't that great?
no, wait a second. Well, the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna send Daphne a text. Daphne, would you be open to the idea of moving our show from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m.? And you said, "Sure, no problem." And I'm like, "Ching, that's moved." And then
Amazing.
and then I had a podcast interview scheduled with someone, and I said, "Hey, I noticed that we have a thing scheduled for such and such date. Would you be willing to move that to the afternoon at this time?" They said, "Sure, no problem." And then I had a hair appointment with the lady who cuts my hair on a Wednesday, and I'm like, "Hey, is there any," and of course, I'm not doing this last minute. I'm doing these, a week in advance.
Sure.
I did allow myself to have 2 or 3 days where I'm still getting up and I'm like no nap in the middle of the day because of the change and stuff like that. But anything that was like 3 to 5 days out, which is my own standard of what I'd like to have if
Yeah.
things are gonna be shifting on my schedule, living up to my own standard, I reached out to everyone else, and everyone else was like, absolutely. And then there was one person, there was still this one interview that was on my schedule, and I looked at it and I saw that I went to the schedule link that I used to originally schedule that session. He's inviting me to be a guest on his show, and his next availability is not until July or August. And of course, we're recording this on May 13th right now, and it's not until next week. And I'm like, hmm. So I just went in and canceled. I changed my yes to a no, and I
Mhm.
wrote an email and said, hey, I really apologize. But I just want to let you know some things have shifted in the way that I'm prioritizing my schedule. And as a result of that, I'm not available on such and such date. We booked this way back in March, and I noticed that your next availability is not until July or August. As a result of that, I'm just going to pass on this because I don't want to book another time in July or August because I may have yet another tweak or shift in the prioritization of my schedule. I really apologize for any inconvenience, but I really appreciate this. And next thing you know, just 2 days of the shift that I had to deal with some prior agreements,
Mhm.
prior arrangements, but then I just went and it's like, "You know what? I don't have to do this, like, no sleep, for 14 hours straight days."
Yes, you do.
I'm like, "I'm just gonna set a boundary here." And then what I love from this point forward, Daphne,
Mhm.
outside of Wednesdays, for the foreseeable future, maybe for the rest of my life,
Who knows?
without any or without very rare exceptions, nothing gets scheduled on my calendar from this day forward before noon.
Yeah,
And that's it.
wonderful. And that's
So
it.
it's but to reach out to my because I had hair appointment this month in a couple of weeks, and then we had the next several ones, and they were all at like 11:30 and 12, and I'm like, no, I really want that nap, and
I'm up at 4.
I really want that nap in the middle of the day, and I'm like, you know what? It's not that big of a deal, and if it is that big of a deal, then I'll deal with that.
Mhm.
But yeah, it was the old me would have had a difficult time because the
Yes.
old me had a belief system that if you've booked an appointment on somebody, I mean, how many times do I bring up people canceling appointments, right?
Yeah.
This is one of those things. It's a pretty sticky item in my mind. It's I when I make a commitment, I make a commitment.
Mhm.
But at the same time, at the same time, I'm also committed to this new priority.
Yeah.
And this new priority usurps the old priority. And I'm like, I need to really protect this afternoon. I really want at least a 90-minute nap in the middle of my day
Mhm.
to be able to live into this new daily routine.
Yes. And I think you're bringing up something that's just I wanna get into, what we mean by boundaries, and I have a very simple definition of it. And I really think you're bringing up something so important what you just said is, you take your what's on your calendar sincerely, right? You take your commitments with people sincerely, agreements you make with people sincerely, and things do change. And I think that's really helpful to make a distinction between, hey, I'm intentionally changing this because it doesn't work for me versus everything is up for grabs. Right? I never keep any of my appointments. It's chaos, over here. And, I'm never going to honor anything, which you can do that too. That to me is a different form of a lack of boundaries.
Yep.
Likely when that is happening for people, and this is what usually happens, is they say yes to everything and then they really are not committed to actually meeting any of it. So there's a phrase by one of our favorite people, Gay Hendricks. He says, "You'll never have enough time to do the things you don't want to do."
Mhm.
And I think it is a perfect phrase that describes a lack of boundaries. It points that direction. So let's get to a definition really quickly, what we mean, what I mean, and probably what you mean by boundaries. Very simply, I think it is our ability to say yes and no. And
Yeah.
actually what I say is it's our ability to say no and then our ability to say yes. In my experience, I know that if I cannot fully own my no, I never get to a full yes.
One of my favorite lines in the show outline that you created is
Okay.
that "no" is a complete sentence.
Yeah. It's a complete sentence.
I
There's
love
no
that.
explanation needed. There's no why needed. There isn't. I mean, if someone wants to know, they can always ask, but really it's like, I won't be available.
Yep.
That was a complete sense. Yeah.
Exactly, and that's one of the things. I love that definition of a boundary. A boundary is being able to clearly communicate a yes or a no.
And I really, for myself, I really challenge myself when necessary to own my no first. When I have that moment of like, yeah, I don't know, because I know myself. And to your point about needing to learn how to have boundaries, I know that if I don't let myself fully own the no as it comes up, then I will compulsively, without presence, without intentionality, say yes. That pattern, and
Really?
I encourage yeah, I mean, not in every situation, of course, but I can catch it. I can feel myself when I go, "Oh," it sounds something like this, like, "Oh, yeah, I could, yeah, okay, yeah, we can go." But I feel it, like, even my body, like, you can even notice my body language, like, "Yeah, we can," and I kinda, and I can feel it's almost like I'm trying to it's like fitting a peg into a square. And I can feel myself. I mean, such a body experience for me. I can feel myself wanting to manipulate myself into the situation. So I allow myself and encourage myself and challenge myself to really just say no first.
I love that. Okay, so listen to this. Daphne, you've met my family, right?
Yes, yes.
And they love you. I'm talking specifically, especially with my kids. They absolutely love you. And the next time you see them, if you remember, I want you to ask them, is this true?
Okay.
If they ask me for anything, and I do mean the word anything, ask them what my immediate response will be.
I bet you it's no.
My immediate response to every request is no. And the reason
Okay.
why is because I had, like I said, lived most of my life without boundaries.
Yeah.
Now I'm very intentional about what my boundaries are, and I guard those boundaries. Like there's sentinels and sentries, and they're like, they're
Yes.
armed guards. And it's like, listen, who are you? Why are you here? There's a boundary here for a reason. So
That's
anyway,
so great. So do you find that by allowing yourself first of all, you've given yourself permission, and that's what I'm talking about. Like I've
oh
given
yeah.
myself permission to say no. I didn't feel for a long time in my life that I even had permission to
I
say
did
no.
I struggled with that until I didn't.
Yes.
And then when that happened, it took a couple of times. It felt awkward at first.
Yeah. So clunky.
One of the things that I've noticed is that a majority of the people that I truly care how they perceive me and what they think about me, although again, shouldn't take anything personally, but there are still some people in my life
Mhm.
that it may what they think means a great deal at some
Sure.
level. And what I recognize is every one of those people appreciated. They literally spoke appreciation for my boundary.
Yes. And by the way, this is also how you know you are surrounding yourself with people that have a healthy sense of boundaries. And I'll just get right to the meat of it. When you tell someone no and they push, and actually, I think I wrote this in the notes, there's some responses that are not healthy. They push back. They want you to rationalize why. Explain yourself, sir. Right? They do these sorts of, they give you the silent treatment. They, can become passive aggressive. This is a person who probably themselves doesn't have a good sense of healthy boundaries. And by the way, I'm not speaking about perfection here. We're all practicing to some degree. Nevertheless, that those are things to watch out for, because people who have healthy boundaries have something that they are really able to accept, and it's the response no.
Yeah.
They're able to respect that, and honor that. And maybe there's shifts and other, ways to get to yes and that sort of thing that can happen. Nevertheless, they're really open to hearing that. So I think that's always a good indicator that you're surrounding yourself with people who have healthy boundaries too, because they honor yours and they listen to yours.
Yeah, and the
Yeah.
other side of it is occasionally there are some people who are they do push back. They
Hmm.
get very offended.
Hmm.
They begin to criticize and complain and condemn.
Yes.
And at that moment, I'm like, wow, I'm so glad I said no.
I have been spared.
That is exactly. It's like, wow, these boundary things actually work.
They do work. They do work.
And
And
I do want to say for my kids though,
yeah.
when
Yes.
they tell me something and say, "Hey, Dad, can we do this?" and the answer is no, that's not currently on the schedule.
Yeah.
And what they've learned, and they do this, they're not pushing back, but in a way, what they're saying is like, "But Dad, are you open to having a conversation about the benefits of us doing this?" And I'm like, the answer to that question is yes. I'm open to a conversation about the benefits of us as a family going and doing this, as long
Yes.
as you're open to the possibility that my answer will still be no at the end of said conversation.
I'm willing to listen and to hear your perspective. Yes.
Yes, I'm skeptical, but I'm willing to listen.
But
Fifth
I'm willing
agreement.
to listen. So I want it. So this is so let me get with why, like, why do we care? Why are we talking about this? Like, why do we care about boundaries? And I want to just, sort of I say this quite a bit, but asterisk sort of what happens when we don't have them. And I don't know, Cliff, you worked with a lot of entrepreneurs. I work with people in organizations, and I think this is where there is nothing that will lead to burnout faster than a lack of boundaries. And this is, and I'm sure for you too, when you're working with clients, you run into this all the time. And we both lived it. We both lived it as people building our business and working our business. But this is the experience of, I think people have a lot of different, I use the word burnout because I think people can relate to it, but the anxiety that we can start to experience, the overwhelm, what I call the 3 a.m. in my head conversation, or I'm not sleeping well. I'm feeling just chaotic, spread too thin, the whole thing, right? I think you said this phrase to me once, I'm over obligated and undercommitted.
Yeah.
Right. And so this is really, again, at the foundation is just this lack of boundaries, this inability to say what we need, to us to own a know about how we're doing things and what we're doing. And this is why it's so important to learn over time how to do this, how to have boundaries. And I want to say a little bit, because I think you and I are pointing to something that's really important. You can be there's sort of grades of boundaries, I would say. There's wishy-washy. That used to be where I would play a lot. I was really wishy-washy, right? Like, "Ooh," like, please don't ask me to lunch. And then I went the other direction. I still have a little bit of it where I can be very rigid. And that is part of my practice of giving myself permission. So you and I are describing a little bit of that. Like, we're going to say no first, right? It's going to feel like there's some rigidity there at times. And I'm still practicing with that. And then there's kind of landing in that sweet spot. And I think depending on the circumstances and the context, the situation, we all can vacillate in between these. So it's like we're trying to be Goldilocks.
Yeah, I lean towards the rigid side of things.
Yeah, I do too.
For me personally,
Yeah.
because I lived my life for too long with the wishy-washy and or no boundaries at all. And
Yes.
I would rather be rigid and suffer the consequences of that than the consequences of an unprotected boundary.
Yeah, me too.
So I do agree that there are sometimes some negative consequences to being overly rigid. There was somebody who reached out to me just recently, and it was one of those Facebook connections, and I said, "Hey, welcome my newest Facebook friend. I'm curious, what are you most excited about?" And we went back and forth, and he's like, "Hey, Cliff, would you be open to having a 20-minute chat sometime?" And I did not do what I typically do to my kids. The answer is not immediately no, although in my mind, the answer is absolutely not. I am definitely not open to an unscheduled 20-minute chat. And of course, not that I didn't say any of this to this person, right?
Right.
This is the
Right.
inner dialogue.
Yeah.
It's like, if you only knew what I'm trying to manage right now. I'm just starting this new routine. I'm not sleeping for the last 3 days. This is crazy. And I am so burned out and overwhelmed at the end of the day. The other day, Stephanie and I were talking because she asked me if drive over to our daughter's house to do this. And I said, "Stephanie, this is a thought that occurred to me." She goes, "Have you thought about doing this, this, this?" I said, "Stephanie, those are all great ideas. Can you bring them up at another time? Because I do not have the mental capacity to process that right now." And so
I think you should have said this all to that person, and I bet you that they would have been like, "Never mind."
so I went through,
create some barriers to entry.
so I went through all of this in my mind, and then I replied, "Let me ask you a question. what would you hope to walk away with if I were to agree to a 20-minute chat with you?
Mm.
And it's like I'm curious.
Yeah, that's a very great question, actually.
So he wrote what he'd like to accomplish. It spoke to my heart. And then I said this: what would be the earliest time you could meet tomorrow morning via Zoom? He said 9 a.m. I said, what's the best email to send you an calendar invite to? Just so you know, I will be sitting in the front seat of my car, parked in the back of the gym, because I'm doing a special morning routine. I'd be delighted to have a 20-minute chat with you, but it will be only 20 minutes.
Yeah. And it will be tomorrow.
And it will be tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so I'm like that, and then we had that chat. It was amazing. Then we scheduled an interview, and there's some great potential things are coming. So it's one of those cases where I lean towards being rigid,
Hmm.
but even though I say I'm never going to have another scheduled call before noon, I
Right.
still allowed that to happen, but I still believe that I did what was necessary to protect my boundary.
Hmm.
I asked a question, and I'm like,
Yes.
okay, here's what this person is wanting. This isn't a sales pitch. This isn't a that. This is a genuine person who's in my community, who is wanting to know, what's going on in my world, and he wanted to know if I'd be interested in being a guest, but he wasn't sure about how to approach it. I'm like, hey, let's just, as long as you're cool with the totally laid back Zoom call, I'm sitting in the front seat of my car, 20 minutes, let's do it.
Yeah. And one of the things I appreciate about that example, Cliff, is you also ask some questions, right? Like, and that is some of the some of the openness to go, well, I don't have a yes to this right in the minute. Let me ask some questions and get a little bit more understanding. And what's true, probably based on what you've just said, is that you really had no intentions of doing a spontaneous 20-minute call right at that minute, whether you were available or not, right?
Well, he
Like,
was not asking for a spontaneous one.
oh, okay.
So he was like, "Hey, Cliff, this is great that we're having this chat back and forth. I
Hmm.
was wondering if you'd be open to scheduling a 20-minute chat
Okay.
sometime
Okay.
for us
Okay.
to kind of network and get together." And I'm like, "That sounds really unappealing to me right now."
Yeah. Got it. So
So
even just thinking through that.
I did not say that to him, but
Yeah.
but the thought of me just having a 20-minute networking conversation with somebody I just met on Facebook, just that does not ring at the top of my values list. Is like, I love people, but I love my free time more.
Yeah.
I love my me time. I like my alone time. I like this. And this was not something that I was already, it's like, you know what I need? I need to schedule more 20-minute chats with random strangers I've not met before.
Yeah. I need more of those also and just meetings on my schedule, not.
And that's really the key. What
Yeah.
basically it's not so much, I do love people, and
Yeah.
I have a value of meeting people and serving people and getting to know people. I'd prefer to do that through asynchronous communication,
Mhm. Yeah. And
but to
you're not
put
the
a
only one.
20-minute scheduled call on a calendar, that there's to Cliff Ravenscraft, a block of time on a calendar where I agree to be at a certain place at a certain time with a certain person for a certain period of time, that is a massive commitment in my mind.
Yeah, it in my opinion should be. So let's talk about this because I want to bring in a concept around autonomy.
More profound than the concept of life?
Not quite as that. Not quite as Come on, Cliff.
Just a little callback, I'm sorry.
Nothing can be more profound than that. So, one of the things I think that is true for me, I imagine it's true for you around working for ourselves and having our own businesses and doing our own thing is we have access to a certain level of autonomy around our schedule.
Mm.
Yeesh, that most people, if you're working for someone in an organization, that people don't have. I had a client tell me, I, I can't remember. I told the story someplace else, but I had a client tell me she went to bed at about 9 o'clock at night and woke up to her phone dinging that there was a meeting that had got put on her calendar at 7 in the morning. So at some point between the time she went to bed at 9 o'clock and woke up the next morning at about 6 a.m., a meeting invite popped up for 7 a.m. Now, not only was it a meeting invite for 7 a.m., it had 30 people on it. And I think this is some of the experience, and I'll talk about the coaching we did in a second, but I think this is some of the experience that people can have with meeting invites, people tugging on their time, that lack of autonomy around our schedule, and to work with our own pacing, to work in alignment with what our energy feels like, really get stripped away. And the reason that I think this is important is that I'm not sure if you're familiar with Daniel Pink's book that was written many, many years ago. And he looked at his research, he looked at what people really want in their careers, what really brings people to life. And he put it up against people getting bonuses. So he was really looking at sort of intrinsic, extrinsic motivators. What he landed on, and it's his book Drive, and there's tons on the internet that people can find about this. And I'll put a link in the show notes. But he talked about what people really want is mastery, to feel like they've gotten better at something, a sense of purpose, like you just said it, like you love people, you love being of service to people, right? So there's purpose in the work that you're doing. You're being able to serve others, and autonomy. As I thought about that, and even putting this together and thinking more and more about boundaries and working so much and working with myself and living in organizational life, how little autonomy could be experienced in a day, especially around a schedule, especially around where you're committing your time, what you're giving your time to. So not only the schedule, even the projects that you're working on. And what an affront that can be,
Yeah.
especially if you don't have a healthy sense of boundaries.
I definitely remember, because I've been full-time self-employed since January 2008, and I've had
Yeah.
full autonomy of my schedule ever since then.
Yeah.
And I do recall for 12 years as an insurance agent, I'm at the office Monday through Friday from these, the normal business hours, oftentimes working late because there was paperwork that needed to still be gathered after all the sales had been made. So, and also I had to answer whatever call and perform whatever request for whatever client called. There was no choice in any of that. And
Yes.
so I had some level of what you're talking about. And I remember the lack of autonomy, and trust me, full autonomy over your schedule is a curse at first.
Yeah. How long were you in insurance? 12 years?
12 years. Yeah.
And prior to that, you probably did something else, I'm
Uh,
imagining.
My entire working life as an
Yeah.
employee had lack of autonomy of schedule.
Yeah. Our
And
entire
then
lives do.
And now I was like, I have the freedom to do whatever I want, which was great, except for the fact that actually I went to work for a tyrant when I went full-time self-employed
For yourself.
for myself.
Well, yeah. So even that, we even can violate our own, I'm saying violate your own boundaries. You might not have even known what they were. I did the same thing. I mean, the only thing I had in my DNA when I left my first corporate job, the only sort of thing that was wired into me was work a lot.
Yeah.
Do a lot, work a lot, because that's what I believed you had to do to be effective in your job. There, the idea, and I think this is what stops people quite a bit. Again, we'll come right back to it. If I have a boundary, I will lose my job. I will lose the approval of the people I work with.
Yeah.
Right.
And the issue that I ran into when I went full-time self-employed, a majority of my peer group was very much caught up in the hustle movement.
Yes. Yes. The
The
hustle.
culture.
Ugh. What about the
And
grind?
well, the grind goes along with it, absolutely. But the hustle culture, along with my limiting beliefs at the time that the
Yes.
harder you work, the more money you should earn, and the more difficult what you do is, the more you should earn, and the
Yes.
more you hate what you do, the more you should get paid to do it.
Oh man, that's a good one.
So I had all of these messed up beliefs around work and money and time, and my peer group was hustle this, hustle that. So yeah, it was even though I had full autonomy over my schedule, I'm the one in control of it. But man, I filled it up way too much. Let's just put it
Yes.
that way.
Yeah, unnecessarily.
You
Yes.
mentioned this person that has a lack of autonomy, in that this a scenario where after 9 p.m. a call got scheduled for a meeting at 7 a.m. And my question is for a certain individual that might have this scenario,
Mhm.
not speaking about your client, but just the average person in corporate that might have something like this happen. And I have no doubt that it happens often to a lot of people.
Yeah.
So my question is what is the customary, ordinary, expected time of the start of day of when work would be started? Like, when is an average employee in said corporate structure expected to log in and look to see what new messages and look at their schedule and stuff like that? What time does that begin on average?
I think it would be great if there was a time.
That would be a boundary that I think could be set.
Yeah, it can. And in most people have the experience, at least the people and myself included in that, have the experience that I need to be engaged, plugged in all the time, looking at my phone. I mean, this is some of the addiction, issues that come out of being hooked to a phone, right? Having access to email. I mean, you send an email. To me, email has become the social media of corporate organizations. Teams, instant messaging chats, they're no different to me than the shadowy side of social media. And they've been existing long, long before social media existed.
Right.
I think these addiction issues and our dopamine hits were put in place long. I'm not that I'm giving social media a pass here, but just were put in place long before social media ever came onto the scene.
Yeah.
And
So
that just ramped it up, right?
absolutely. So the
Yeah.
first thing that I would think of as a boundary for myself is I'd like to get some sort of like who's my direct reports?
Yeah.
And who are my down reports and who are
Mhm.
my peers? And I'd like to get confirmation that the expectation is that I don't log in before 8 a.m. or I don't log in before 7 a.m.
Yeah.
Whatever the case. And by the way, I'm unreachable after 5 p.m. or I'm unreachable after 6:30 p.m. I'm okay with it being more than an 8-hour day. That doesn't bother me. But
Mhm.
there's for me, I I I have a firm belief that even if I'm in this corporate leadership structure and all this other stuff, I still have autonomy in whether or not I choose to continue to work here if I can't create a boundary where there's an expected time that I know that I'm going to be logging in. So if I log in at 7 and I find out there's a meeting at 7 a.m. and I miss said meeting because I was notified after 6:30 p.m., hey, how was the meeting? Feel free to shoot me the transcript. I'll have AI summarize the meeting for me, and I'll even train AI on my way of thinking, and I'll have it give you my feedback.
You can interact with Chat GPT.
It's probably what's
Oh, it's
happening
probably
anyway.
coming if it isn't already there. Yeah,
It's probably
absolutely.
already
It's probably
happening.
already there. Yeah, I mean, Cliff, you're speaking exactly to I think the experience that most people want to have, and to establish those boundaries up front to say, okay, what is it? Depending on the culture, culture drives a lot of these things. The culture of the organization you're in. There are cultures that are like, look, if you're not in on Sunday, don't come in on Monday.
Yeah.
And if you know that ahead of time, then great. You know what you're signing up for.
You
My
still
ex-
have some level of autonomy to choose that. That's the
that's
key that
right.
I'm going after.
Bingo. Absolutely.
But what we're talking about here is, are you aware that you have said autonomy?
Yes.
And if you desire to put more boundaries in place, are you willing to take your autonomy and try and implement and then protect said boundaries?
That's exactly right. And that is exactly what I'm pointing to. Is that and even with this client, I said, well, what was frustrating? What bothered you about that? Like you wake up and you see this, she's like, well, there's no way I'm gonna make it. It's just expected that we'd be there. And I'm like, has anyone told you that you were expected to be at the meeting? And there was silence for a minute. And she's like, no. And I said, okay. I said, did you talk to your boss about I said, did you make the meeting? She said, no. I said, okay, great. I said, did you talk to your boss about whether you were expected to be there, since it seems as though the invite, like, how reasonable are these people? Like, are they just invites just fly around, which also is an experience many people have in
Yep.
corporate organizations, right? They're invited to stuff all the time. No one knows why. I mean, having 30 people in a meeting, I mean, if you just do the math on it, that's not going to work. And it was a 45-minute meeting. So we've got 30 people. Do you really want to hear from all 30 people? Because you've only got 45 minutes. That's basically a minute a person. And that never happens. There's usually one person talking for 20 minutes. Right. So just the math alone doesn't work. And nevertheless, and I said, well, did you talk to your boss about what the expectation was? So, and this person has worked, to your point, this person has worked in this organization for years.
Yep.
And this has been recycling. And so there's never been that willingness to say, okay, what's the risk, right? I have to get through a little, I have to be a little risk tolerant here to put myself in the position to say, hey, I noticed this. I'm not going to be available before 9 a.m. So if invites come in, we haven't talked about it before. And I think this is some of when I've, worked with people, they're shifting their psychic address. If they haven't done this before, it can feel really foreign to them, and it can absolutely feel foreign to the people that they're working with.
Yep.
So there has to be a little bit of a stepwise process. I encourage people to go gently with themselves mostly, and to just recognize this is going to feel like a shift. Right. This is going to feel like you're going to be renegotiating, as you did with your meetings, right? Renegotiating some things, and to say, I know we have this meeting. This meeting's been scheduled. I'm no longer going to be able to attend. I'd like to shift the meeting, this weekly meeting, to 9 a.m. going forward, and to make that request. Now, you could hear a no. This is the other side of boundaries, by the way.
Yep.
When you haven't had a person, or when you have not been a person who has had healthy boundaries, also hearing a no can feel very frustrating to you. Possibly it did to me. Like, I didn't have healthy boundaries. When people would tell me no, I would know, it's like, "Ugh, well, I'm putting up with all this crap. Why aren't you?" Right. And so being comfortable hearing a no, and someone might say to you, no, unfortunately, we can't shift it. Okay, well, what's the next step then? Right.
Yep.
Or maybe it becomes, well, I'll be able to attend every other week then. Just continuing to move forward in that way that the schedule can work for you. But this is a real thing. And this is why I wanted to talk about it, because it is, when we talked about the 4 agreements last week, I really was sitting like, boy, there's so many. And the way through, I think, getting to what are the conscious agreements that I am making, is to really look at what boundaries do we need in our life. Where are we just continually saying yes and never able to say no, or giving ourselves permission. So you're right on it. It's really owning our own ability to own our autonomy and our own agency. And that is found through boundaries, for sure.
I do want to point out one of the biggest things that I think people will run into is the fear of what might
Yes.
happen, what you could lose.
Yes,
And for some
absolutely.
people, the fear of losing my job and I don't have a backup plan or whatever, or if
Yes.
you're full-time self-employed and it's a big client that is what there's something known as scope creep for a lot of freelancers and things
Yes.
of that nature. It's like, ah, man, this person has been my greatest client. The only thing is 70% of my income comes from this one client. And it was all great and wonderful when we started working together. But, what started out to be a contract where they have me on retainer, and it's been wonderful. And my anticipation was that's about 15 to 20 hours a week of my time. But now they're still paying me the same, but
Yep.
they continue to add more and more projects. And I haven't changed the agreement. I haven't
This
changed
is so good.
anything. And now I'm working for them about 35 to 40 hours a week. I have hardly any time for my other clients, and I have no time to market.
Yeah. So this is such a great example. Yes. And so now, and I also think there's you've talked to me about this before too. The one client that's taking up 80% of your time,
Yep.
right? That's generating that. I think that's what you're pointing to. And maybe that switched in unintentionally, it started to switch, right? So how to set the boundaries around that?
And the fear of losing because if you start incorporating boundaries, especially depending on how long you've let this go, you've set some sort of expectation that
Yes.
this is what the arrangement is, even though it wasn't the arrangement originally. It's what it's become, it's what it's evolved into.
Yes.
And if you go in and start guns a-blazing with your your boundaries,
It may feel a little bit shocking.
and there is a potential that 70% of your income could go away overnight.
Yeah. Yes.
And
So
that is a big fear for a lot of people who don't have boundaries, but who desperately need them.
yes. Well, let's talk through it. Like, how do we, and you and I both had a path, but how do we start to really engage in setting boundaries? Let's use that example. I think it's a great one, right? And I have a couple other ones I can bring in, but let's use that as an example and say, okay, what does it look like to start? You're noticing this is happening. You're noticing it's starting to creep. You're recognizing, look, if I come in guns a-blazing, I could completely lose this client. Might not want to do that. And if you enjoy the client, you really might not want to do it, right?
Yeah.
Hopefully you're not working with clients you don't enjoy. That's a different conversation. But yeah, how do we start to renegotiate this? What can the path look like?
The first thing that I would do myself and that I also help my clients do is I spend a lot of alone time and I evaluate how everything has worked out. How did I get here? And then I ask myself the most important question. 3 months from now, what do I want my life and or business to look like?
Yeah. So good.
That's the first thing. If I could wave a wand and magically make everything in my business appear exactly the way that I want it, what would it look like? And I specifically think about 3 months out because many times it may take up to 90 days to fully
Yes.
implement and see the change. And so that's the first thing. The next thing
So
is
let me
yeah,
mark
go
that
right ahead.
because this is really important. The first thing you're doing is you're asking yourself one of the most powerful questions, and it has everything to do with vision setting. What do I want my life to look like in 3 months? And it could take you a full 3 months. As a matter of fact, it could take you 6 months to get there,
Yep.
but you're having the conversation with yourself. This is the place to start. What do I want it to look like? Okay, keep going.
Yep. So once you have that, you have maybe a bullet point list of all of these things that you want. The next thing that you would ask and that I would ask is what are the things that need to happen for this shift to go from my current experience to the desired experience? What needs to happen? And then I have a bullet point list of all of those things that need to shift, all of the different changes that need to be implemented.
Yep.
Then for each one of those, what are 1, 2, or 3 actions that I could take within the next 24 hours, within the next 7 days, within the next 30 days, and within the next 90 days? And I would put all the answers to those questions and with how many days those actions should be taken. Now I have a step-by-step action plan to begin implementing some of these changes. And some of and you may need to do a little bit of research. You may need to go back and come up with a narrative and a compelling story and ask this client, hey, can we schedule a one-on-one 30-minute session together? I've got a proposal of something that I need to bring up.
Yes. And so I want to mark the other two parts of the process here. So the vision, what are the actions that I can take? And also recognizing this may require me to do a little bit of homework, right, to get this. And we're going to bump into, and I want to keep calling this out is because I've done this process many, many, many times, is you get to that action step, you're going to bump into your fear. It's
Yep.
going to be like, oh, I can't possibly do that. I can't possibly say this. This is the communication part of it, right? It's sort of like, well, how do I communicate this in a way that it can be heard? And how do I communicate this in a way that it makes it and this is, I think, really, really helpful, that I can create a win for both as best I can,
Yes.
that
Matter of
there's a
fact,
win for all.
a special bonus question. How can I communicate this in such a way with integrity
Yes.
that what I want is in the best interest of both of us?
Yes. Exactly.
And when you begin to put it that way and frame the question that way, you start to have, especially if you're outside of your stress, high range beta alpha wave brainwaves. So if not, go meditate for a while,
Yeah,
do some
exactly.
breath work, then come back and ask these questions. And when you frame the question that way, every time there's an answer to that question.
Yeah. Usually. I have not ever not had one.
There's always the question because here's the situation. Having somebody hire you to do work that is the scope has creeped way beyond the original agreement and has you burned out and overwhelmed, it is not in their best interest to keep underpaying you for all this additional work that was never agreed upon. It is never in their best interest
And that
because
goes for a client or your boss or whoever. It's never in their best interest or
it's
yours.
never in their best interest because you will burn out.
Yes.
You will end up in the hospital or you will go bankrupt and have to shut down your business. It will ultimately in the end work out terribly for them if you don't change this.
The cost of burnout for an individual, I have not released this essay yet. It's probably going to be a 3-part essay. I want to just be really clear that the cost of burnout for an individual with health problems, if you are an individual who is earning about 80,000 a year, it can erode your net take home pay so quickly, even when you have health insurance, let alone the cost of relationships and the cost of a divorce. So
Yep.
if you don't think that this has real implications for your life, it truly, truly does. So I really have put the dollars and cents to this finally.
I love that. When is that gonna be available,
Well,
Daphne?
probably in about 2 weeks. It's become a
Awesome.
long form essay. I mean, it's taken me, I've been working on it for weeks and weeks. There's been a lot of research because I think there's been a lot of conversation about the cost of burnout to organizations in retention, what they call presenteeism, where people are there, but they're not really working. And I haven't seen where people have really done the math on what it costs, the potential cost, the direct cost to an individual,
Yeah.
your health, your physical health, your mental health, all of these sorts of things. So I've been really taking the time to put the math to that so that people can see this is the potentiality, let alone just walking around in the world like a zombie, right? Not being able to engage fully with your life. So yes, to all the things you just said. All right. So the communication. Now I want to talk about this. This is the second part of this, and being able to hold a boundary. I'm going to sound like a Seinfeld sketch here. Anybody can make a reservation. It's the holding them that really matters. So we can communicate the boundary. But when the boundary is not respected, or when the boundary gets stepped on, we have to be willing to take action on that. This is, let alone setting a boundary or expressing a boundary. You think that's hard? Now take the action to hold the boundary. And this becomes an even dicier sort of thing. So how do we walk through, okay, I've set this boundary, and let's keep with this client scenario. I think it's a very good one. I've established this new boundary. It seems like a win-win. And I fast forward 2 weeks, and here I am again, or 3 weeks or 4 weeks. And here I am again doing a lot more work than I had signed up for this client. And they seem to not be following the boundary that I set. What do
So
you
is
say
there a
now?
so what do you say now? Well,
Yeah.
it depends on what the
And I
conversation was.
recognize we're playing a scenario here,
Yeah,
so it's just
you know that I don't typically do well with hypotheticals,
yeah,
because I like to dig in and find out what were the details. What was the conversation? What was the boundary? What were the agreements?
yeah.
So
Do you have a clear one?
yeah.
Yes.
What the thing is was the agreement, and one of the things that I might have suggested is an agreement that says, "Hey, our original written agreement stated that there would be X number of work, and in this, and here are the additional items beyond that. I would love to continue to do this for you. Here's the rates at which I would be willing to continue to do them. Are you agreeable for me charging for these when they're called upon?"
Yeah.
And so in the event that, the original work that used to take me 15 to 20 hours a week, all of a sudden here comes a new layer of all this other stuff. It's like, "Hey, I would love to have you do this, 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 and this." And it's like, just like you did the last 3 times. It's exactly like that. I just need you to do that exact thing for me again. Wonderful. I just want to go ahead and let you know I'll be sending you an invoice tomorrow morning when I get back in the office.
Yes. I had so we can, and I think that's perfect. I think the important point I want to make there is that there really has to be a willingness on if I'm the person setting the boundary, there also has to be the willingness on my part to continue to hold it
And
and
enforce it.
enforce it. That's right. And to call it out when it seems like, hey, we made this agreement that we would start at 9. I mean, I've had this with a client. The agreement was we start at 9. I noticed this morning that people were walking in at about 9:10. Now I want you to know I'm going to start at 9.
Yeah.
So, and I don't repeat myself. I mean, I had
I
to do this with clients. I'm like, I don't repeat myself. No one will be bringing anyone up to speed on what was done. Here's what was beautiful about that, Cliff. Once I did that once, ask me how many times people showed up late.
Never.
Never. It never happened again. Because they just knew, like, oh, she's really serious. Like, she's going to start at 9. And I do want to honor my psychology professor in college who who did this. So we'd all be filing in. I will never forget this, my freshman year of college. And he is up at his podium And he had the clock that faced away from him on the wall. I figured this out. And he would stand there and he'd look at it. And right at the hour, I think our class was at 11, he would start talking. And
Yep.
he would just be so we're wandering in. It's 11:05 and
Yeah.
he just keeps going. And I was like, that is so brilliant. And he never said a word. Never said a word to the class. And I'm telling you, it only took one time. The next class, we were all in there and seated
Yeah.
3 minutes before the hour.
I love that. I once had a meeting that I was hosting for a group of people. We meet every single week, all this other stuff. And then one time somebody showed up about 13 minutes late. And somebody who was speaking said, "Oh, by the way, what you missed was," and I cut that person off. I said, "Hey, please don't go back and rehash
Yes.
what's already been said. Hey, so and so, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Glad to have you here. Just so you know, this meeting's being recorded. The replay will be available. If you want to capture what happened in the first 13 minutes, you can watch the replay. Go ahead. Finish what you were saying before so and so joined us."
Yeah.
And it's
Yes.
like, it's that. It's like, listen, let us really, truly, authentically respect one another's time. Now, there may be any myriad of reasons, and there's nothing to call that. I wasn't calling that person out for being 13 minutes late. I have no idea why that person was 13 minutes late.
Sure.
But what we're not going to do is back up and replay the first 7 minutes of the 13 minutes that we've got into this meeting already.
That's correct. And I think that, in any part of our life, but especially in organizational life or when you're leading your mastermind groups, and could you imagine if you're like, okay, we'll start at noon and people are logging on,
We
you're like,
start like 4 or 5 people come in late. Keep starting over each time they come in.
but this is what happens in
I've seen
organizational
it.
life. Yeah.
I have
mean,
seen it.
I've lived it. And I will confidently tell you when I would lead meetings, we started at noon. If
Yeah.
people weren't there or whatever time it was, the commitment was. And this just, again, it releases the chaos that gets started. It decreases the overwhelm. People know what to expect. I mean, when we talk about the certainty that we desire in life, at least knowing the meeting's going to start and end on time is really
Yeah.
helpful. And if it needs to be renegotiated mid-meeting, then great, do that. But it just is really helpful for people to know what to expect. It decreases anxiety exponentially, just that alone.
So I want to tell one more story, and
Yeah.
it's like, Cliff, how many of these stories are about people not showing up to meetings, right? It's my life, people. Leave me alone. No. So here's the situation. I was doing this thing called the Prosperous Coach Method for creating clients. I invited somebody to a complimentary session,
Yeah.
and that person showed up. Then during the second session, the person didn't show up. So I sent a text message. "Oh my gosh, Cliff, I am so sorry. I don't know how this wasn't on my calendar, blah, 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 all this stuff. Is there any way we can reschedule?" Now, obviously, this is not a paid client, and it's somebody that I did want to have as a client.
Mhm.
So I said, "I will do that, and we can talk about scheduled calls during our next session." And so we rescheduled. Then we had our second complimentary session. I invited him into a coaching relationship for a year. He agreed. And then one of the things I made a point was, "Hey, listen, I just want you to know every time that we have a scheduled conversation at the end of our call, I anticipate that you will, at that moment, add that to your calendar manually. I'm going to send you reminders. They are sent to your email. They're always going to be there, but they will never automatically add to your calendar. That's always going to be your responsibility. I'm going to send you a coaching agreement, and there's language in there that talks about cancellation and rescheduled calls. And if ever you do not if you ever no show on a call or need to cancel a call in less than 3 business days, you forfeit that call and there is no refund for that call.
Yep.
And we only meet once a month. Are you agreeable to this?" And so this person then had a situation where a couple months later, something similar happened. "Hey, Cliff, I'm so sorry. Something came up last minute. I'm not going to be able to make this call." I said, "Hey, no worries. I'll go ahead and get it canceled. I will see you next month. Are you available on this date for our next scheduled call?" And he had no problem with it. And so because of that, we had the boundary. It was
Yeah.
clearly in
The
our
clear
agreement.
agreements. Yeah. Yeah.
And then the interesting thing was just about a month and a half ago, I get on to our scheduled call, and you could just sweat dripping down his face. I said, "How's it going?" He goes, "Oh, man, I am so sick right now. Ah, man. I just like the room is spinning, all this stuff. I had to leave work early and all this other stuff." I said, "Do you want to reschedule our call?" "Man, I didn't want to do that to you. And I really need to chat with you. I've got some big things going on." I said, "I'll tell you what. Why don't you and I reschedule today's call until Monday?" It was Friday. "Why don't we meet Monday?" He goes, "I don't want to do that to you, Cliff." And I said, "This is hey, this is it's on me. Don't worry about it. Go get some sleep. We'll talk Monday. Is that cool?" And so this is where not being too rigid.
Yeah,
So
sure.
there's that
Absolutely.
boundary, that line. Anyway, just another little
Yeah.
story.
Yeah, well, it's a great story. I mean, I think that's the art of I think the most important part is that you had the boundary up front, you had the agreement up front, and there can always be some flexibility in the system. Again, I would just point out, first of all, for this person, and I don't know this person obviously, but if you're a person who finds yourself what I would call chronically missing appointments, chronically not showing up for things, really look at your boundaries.
Yeah.
Or chronically needing to renegotiate, really look at your boundaries. I mean, I had that habit very badly, many, 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 many years ago, because I would just say yes. I would just, agree to things, and just did not have a good sense of boundaries. So I think that's the first thing. And then the second part of it is being able to reinforce them by having some flexibility. Hey, I really want to see you at 4 o'clock. I think this is the other part too that really helped me. I did an inventory, and I'm like, how many times really has it ever been that I truly had something where I didn't have it on my calendar, and I truly had something pop up where I truly physically could not be at said meeting or said appointment? Very rarely.
Yeah.
Right? Like it was that I maybe it wasn't on my calendar, but there were just so many I was over obligated and so overbooked at times that I was just constantly in the moment making these decisions. It was like a really horrible juggling act where the juggler only keeps one thing in the air, but everything's flying everywhere else. And so I think really looking at that for yourself too, if you're a person who really struggles with that, look at your own sense of boundaries. That is where the overwhelm and the anxiety come from, right? And then on the other side, if your person's had really rigid boundaries, looking at maybe where you could have some more flexibility in the system where it feels good to you to do so, and vice versa. If you're wishy-washy with boundaries, maybe you're doing okay with them, but you're still a little incapable of saying no, directly saying no, where people can hear you say no, right? Not so. I find that people can soften their language,
Yep.
and they can soften it so much that people really are unclear. I watch this
Yes.
a lot in leadership where people are not clear, like, what are you asking me to do? Or are you asking me to do something? We're just very unclear. So those, working in both of those realms to kind of get in the sweet spot can be really helpful. So I think it's a great example.
Love
Yes.
it. All
Yes.
right. So we're just over an hour. Do you have a call to action?
Well, I do. I have a couple. One is, and this will be in the show notes. We mentioned Henry Cloud, and he has done a ton of writing on this. I love his work on boundaries. So I'll put that in the show notes. And then the call to action for me is really, if you are a person who has struggled with boundaries or you are struggling with burnout, I confidently can help you through that process. I can help you realize where you can start to get leverage and working with yourself and starting to make some steps. And Cliff, you nailed it, like really creating the life that you want to live, really having the vision. And especially for people in organizations, that is where I can really be helpful in how to navigate that world. It is a different sort of world when you don't feel as though you have the full autonomy over your schedule. So
So if
happy to help.
somebody's involved in an organization in a leadership capacity and they're dealing with this, how do they reach out to you, Daphne?
Thanks, Cliff. You can just send me an email and put in there coaching at daphne@scott.com.
Awesome.
And I will get back to you.
And I will say the same exact thing for anybody who is full-time self-employed on the journey of full-time self-employment, whether you're an elite entrepreneur or an aspiring or early stage entrepreneur. I'm certainly available for coaching. Just put coaching in the subject line. But I also want to speak to those who are already incredibly successful in full-time self-employment. Maybe you've been doing this 5, 10, 20, 30 years, but maybe you might find yourself a little bit lonely. You've got all this autonomy
Yes.
and you just don't have enough community around you. If you could benefit from being around a group of people who are also full-time self-employed, invested in their ongoing personal and professional development, people who have lots of education, lots of experience, a lot of varied skills, talents, and abilities. If you would like to do life with other people who are absolutely committed to helping you succeed in all of your personal and professional and your business goals, the Next Level Mastermind is available. There's about 3 seats that I'd like to fill over the next 90 days. And so if you'd like to be considered for one of those, you can apply at nextlevelmastermind.info. That's not .com, it's nextlevelmastermind.info.
Oh, I love that. And I highly recommend it also.
Absolutely. It is. Daphne's been involved in the Next Level Mastermind. You were a part of it in the very first year in
Yeah.
2017. And then I think about uh, probably 2019 before you and I went to one-on-one coaching.
Yeah, and what's interesting now that you say that, like I've gone in and out, and I think that is something too. If you've been in one and you've gotten out of it, and then you've had a couple years, come back. I think that's the benefit of these, and I really want to recommend if you have been a solopreneur and you really are getting the traction in your business and you're very successful. I can't say enough about the timing to get into, get with Cliff, get into a mastermind group, because that is where you start to get us to a certain level, and you just need that support to kind of get to the next level and to keep getting to the next level. And boy, when it comes to creating the vision for your life, that's really critical, and it can feel a little lonely. So
Yeah.
I think that's, yeah.
Check out, just read the entire sales page, watch all of the videos, and then submit an application. It won't cost you anything to find out more. So thank you so much. All right, Daphne, anything else before we end this stream?
Just keep living this profound life.
Awesome. And choose your own adventure and protect those boundaries. See ya.